Going to start actually out of order, not being out of order, but it's about Keir Starmer because it winds me up. I feel I've got real sort of intuitive antipathy to him. That's a posh way of saying I really don't like the bloke, and I never have, and I've never been able particularly to stomach him. He was a great DPP, a good Director of Public Prosecution, a brilliant lawyer. But when you meet him, you have an intuitive sense that he doesn't have the emotional chemistry, the charisma, but above all else, the sort of human interest to be a great politician. He is a person who is above all else dispassionate. In other words, the critical ingredients that make you a good lawyer, but not necessarily a good politician. So I'm going to start, if I can, seeing as it's the party whose views you mostly espouse, Benjamin Butterworth. Do you think Keir Starmer is a lawyer and not a leader?
Well, I mean, not just because I'm in your company, but being a lawyer is no bad thing. A forensic attention to detail, noticing the small stuff, especially in the years of Brexit, that's a pretty useful skill. And actually, I think we can get lost in the idea of the bombast and the showmanship, which Boris Johnson, has in oodles. But that doesn't necessarily make you a good person to run the country. And I think we're learning that the hard way. But actually, if I'm going to be objective, I think you make a very reasonable point that while people don't necessarily want the absurd show that Boris Johnson puts on that has fallen apart terribly, I think they still expect the human interest. It's the same reason why on shows like this or in newspapers, the stories about individuals, about real life stories, get people's attention far more than stats and figures.
I've seen him at events and I've heard of him at events and, I've been around him and, I'm not going to name any politicians particularly, but, people who have got huge amount of emotional range, like Jess Phillips. And, he sort of sits there and doesn't have that sort of reach out range, that capacity to understand what it means when somebody's in distress to say, I'm your politician, you are the only person in the room. The stuff that Blair had, Clinton had in spades, etc. Don't you think that's right, Dawn Neesom?
I do totally agree with you. I mean, there's a very fine line between being forensic and being boring. I mean, you are forensic, but you're brilliant. You have a personality, you have a warmth. Have I been nice enough yet? Yeah. You can talk to people, you can engage with people. Mm-hmm. And what I feel with Keir, I've never met him, but what I feel with him is you don't warm to him. The voters don't engage with him. They feel like he is cut off from them. Right. I mean, he's not really in touch with their lives. And the only time I heard any emotion from him was when he scented blood with Boris the other day and went for it. And you know what, Rob? That didn't make me think, he's got a personality. Where's that been hiding for the last 2 years? Right. It actually made me think, that's just not very nice. Yeah. There's no humour.
What do you reckon?
I don't think it's fair to say he's not warm because I think there is a warmth to him. I have to say, I've never heard anyone say they actively dislike Keir Starmer.
I'm one.
Which you're the first person I've ever met that said that. Lots of people don't care for him; they don't engage with him, and I think that's a fair objection.
Because
no one dislikes him.
Well, I'm not sure that's true. And the reason for it is because if you're going to be a politician with as compelling a narrative as he has, right, a story where he worked his way up, and this is I suppose where my dislike emanates from. Here's somebody that worked himself up from a genuinely authentic working class background, and not only did he make good, but he really fought for the rights of individuals as a DPP. He was a very serious human rights lawyer that achieved enormous success very young, and deservedly so. You won't find a single lawyer from either side of the political spectrum, wherever they are, that's saying he was anything other than talented. But the thing about it is that he got to London, rather than standing on that narrative, saying, look, I care about you because of the experiences I've had. I know what it is to have a dad that can't get a job, who's been injured at work, and a mum a nurse. And I care about you because of everything I've been through. That passion, that desire to reach beyond the blue wall, whatever it is now, the places that were tribally Labour, and say, I hear you and I understand you. I find his, 2,000-page intellectual document very interesting and certainly useful for the House of Lords, but it doesn't have the emotional range necessary to be a politician in 2022, and it annoys me.
I think he is a bit of a 2D politician. You do need the X factor, and you don't want Boris Johnson. Okay, Boris Johnson is the other extreme, which I think makes him a farce and a joke and a poor statesman for this country on the world stage.
But I've the voters like that. They engage with that. They still do. Incredibly.
I think it's better than nothing. I actually think that people would much rather a serious politician who can also engage with them. I've interviewed Tony Blair over the years and met him a number of times, and I don't know if you might both have met Tony Blair. He has the X factor like no one I've ever met. You know, not Hollywood stars, not US presidents. Tony Blair is the most charismatic man in the country.
Simon Cowell, I have to say, you have just said, Benjamin Butterworth looked into the camera and said, Tony Blair is the most charismatic politician in the country. You're going to get killed by members of the left. I mean that in a Twitter sense.
He also had the creep factor. I interviewed him a couple of times.
Tell me about that, Tom.
And well, I found him very false. Very false. He tried, and I tell you, there's another Prime Minister I interviewed who reminded me exactly the same as him, and that was David Cameron. I felt, honestly, Rob, they were two peas out the same pod on obviously opposite politics. Right. Well, actually, not that obviously with Blair, but they were both creepy. They were both trying too hard. You know, like with David Cameron, I went, he'd obviously read up on me, which was slightly weird in any case.
Well, you were like editor of a significant.
I went for tea.
I mean, from 2003 to 2018, you were editor of Daily Star. I was obviously going to check you out before you arrived.
No, absolutely. Well, you could have done a bit more checking out with some of the journalists he employed, couldn't he? However, I had afternoon tea with him, and he'd obviously got all these little notes in front of him. You could literally see him under the desk looking at these notes, and he started to talk about Aston Villa. And I thought, why is he talking about Aston Villa, the football club? Right. And he'd obviously read that I supported West Ham and was into football, but got the claret and blue thing confused. Right. And I'm thinking, he's leaving.
Well, he also forgot which of those he supports, if you remember.
Well, he was a bit confused.
What you're talking about
he was a bit confused about when he his kids.
Well, well, look, the thing is,
so's Boris.
Well, we don't know how many kids Boris has got.
Not
officially. Well, who knows? The creep factor. Talk to me more about that. What does that mean?
It just means that it's basically falseness. It comes across as someone really trying to be something they're not to win you over, but you can tell that they don't really mean it, and they don't particularly really like you. That's fine. Don't like me. I get that. I don't have a problem with that. However, that fakey, creepy thing going on, it's really hard to articulate what.
But you could have a person who is deeply morally flawed and, very disingenuous, but has the capacity to generate this sort of emotional sense that you're the only person in the room. I remember, for example, the late David Frost was asked, and he'd interviewed everybody in history at that point of any significance. And he said, who's the most charismatic politician you've ever met? And the most authentic? And he said, without missing a beat, Bill Clinton.
Oh, wow.
Without missing a beat. You can watch it.
Interesting.
Right. And if you think about that's a man who did things nowadays which should or would disqualify him from public office.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Now, can we move on? Because a lot of this is about...
Can I just mention one thing about lawyers?
Go on.
And leaders.
Oh, yeah.
You know who was also a lawyer in a previous life?
Who?
Vladimir Putin.
Was he?
Yes.
Well, wasn't he a KGB officer?
Yeah, but he was a lawyer. He trained as a lawyer.
Yeah, but that's right. So was Gandhi.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, Barack Obama.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what's your point? The odd.
I'm just talking. We have in this country, we have a journalist like Benjamin and I currently leading the country, and the person that wants to do the job is a lawyer like you.
Yeah. I think illegal
Good
training.
luck, world.
Illegal training isn't the problem. I'm going to move on. Actually, I think that his legal training is his sort of fundamental problem. I really do, especially the level he achieved. Just to throw this out there, we have had lawyers. Blair, of course, was a barrister for several years.
Yeah.
But he was never director of public prosecutions.
No.
And that's very important. What Keir did was to hold the government to account dispassionately, without fear or favour, which means he has that element of wanting to do that in a way which means you don't have the killer instinct or the authentic desire to reach out, and that's the problem. Now, I have to say, how you triage issues, how you put them in order really does matter. And as a number of you will know, Lord Frost has said that the Tories need to step away from green issues and wokery, and that's a big problem. And he puts those two, if you like, he intertwines them. Is he right, Dawn?
Absolutely bang on the money. The last thing any of us need now, Rob, is green levies. I mean, do you know how much they actually add to the average energy bill, the green levies? I mean, it can be up to 20, if you've just got an electric tariff rather than the dual tariff, it can be up to 25% of your electricity bill, which, as we know, are doubling this spring, can go on green levies. At least put a hold on it, and a lot of that money goes to waste in the green industry.
Well, I want you to add something to your argument, because what effectively Lord Frost is saying is, look, these environmental issues are all well and good, but really they are the political plaything of the privileged. Most people do care about the environment, but they put it down right at the bottom of, given inflation, feeding their kids, being able to pay the bills and looking after the health of themselves and their family. And by placing this front and centre and doing it in the way that they are alienating potential Conservative voters and the poorest and least privileged.
Very much so. And it's we know that, the inflation's going up, we've got the national insurance rise coming up, and this can be put on hold. The government take £9 billion from our energy bills to spend on green and social issues. And a lot of it goes to waste. There was a contract that was set out that we are still paying for that are that companies, it basically means wind farm and solar farms, right? If they're producing too much energy, they have to switch off and turn down and stop producing stuff. Right. In what world does this even make sense?
Well, my question, I suppose, really is that if the Tory party are going to keep those communities and constituencies that were tribally Labour for generations, really, they need to get off talking about this stuff, don't they? I mean, people care about it perhaps, but they've got bigger fish to fry and bigger issues in their families.
I mean, if you actually look at the polling of when people are asked about the issues that are most important to them, quite regularly in the last few years, environmental issues has been right in the top three, sometimes the top issue. That's not my view, that's what polling has found. It has shot up the agenda. People are far more concerned about it across the UK, really? And often it's certainly above immigration, consistently above immigration since Brexit happened.
You're telling me, just to be clear, because you might be right, I don't know, haven't looked at the numbers. If I went to, Bolsover now, and I conducted a poll, the issue of green energy would be a bigger issue within those communities that people are troubled by than the levels of immigration and access to public services.
People are incredibly concerned about what their grandkids are going to inherit in this country.
No, they're not.
I was in Hartlepool recently. No, that's somewhere on the coast. These things are very apparent to
and
people.
They said, you knocked on the doors of Hartlepool. They said they are really troubled about the long-term impacts of global warming. You might be right. That was a bigger issue for people.
I'm sorry, I have to be honest. Look,
that's what I'm saying. I'll be a Hartlepool house owner. You'll knock at the door. Hang on, I've seen you on Talk Radio. You were canvassing for who?
I wasn't canvassing. I was there vox popping for the
canvassing for himself.
Knock. I'm answering the door, and you're saying to me, "Where's Hartlepool? Help me out here." In the
northeast.
Right, I can't do a northeast.
Teesside.
Right. Okay. Sorry, the northeast. Go. All right, mate. I'm really worried about global warming.
It's a beautiful Indian.
Is that what happened? What happened?
Well, hang on.
That's what they said?
Well, I wasn't asking about global warming. I was asking about Boris Johnson, and they weren't so keen on him at the moment. But look, my point is that I actually think it's quite condescending when people sit in London and say, the working class, they don't care about this. That's not the case. People are able to care about the environment that their grandkids inherit at the same time as being acutely aware that they're struggling to make ends meet.
Carry on, Don, but just to be clear, I'm saying the opposite of that. I work and do as much free legal advice for people that are the least powerful, right? That don't have access to safe housing, especially. That's most of the work that I try and champion. And I can assure you, of course, they might care about this stuff. It's not that they're indifferent to it, but they've got much bigger issues that matter to them, especially if they don't have power when it comes to who they're going to vote for.
But you know what? I think the problem with your argument, Benjamin, is that when anybody is asked any question in a poll or an opinion survey, they always say what they think the person asking the question wants to hear. And of course, everyone's terrified of being accused of being a racist these days. And so I say, what are you more worried about? Are you more worried about migrants crossing over the channel in the boats, or are you worried about green energy?
Well, the polls say they're more worried about green energy.
What polls?
Go and look up the YouGov's assessments of the topics.
I am actually going to.
I mean, first of all, the example of the channel has been relatively low quite consistently. It's not really ignited many people's concerns, that doesn't make it right what's happening. No. It's just people. I think that's a great example of something that isn't a direct threat. Most people in the country will look at the tragedy. They may well dislike it, as I do. People being put in vulnerable situations in the channel.
Of course, no one likes that.
But that isn't affecting their ability to pay their bills.
So if you were advising Boris Johnson on his next manifesto, you would say, in order to keep the communities you won on the last occasion, what really matters is that you place at the top green energy, environmental issues, and things like access to services and keeping borders secure. Don't worry about that, Bojo.
But that's a false question, Rob, and I suspect it's an unfair question.
It's not. You just said that's the polling.
No, because, of course, the things like keeping you safe in your home and paying your bills are what push people's buttons, but to say that they don't care about the environment around them. We are a very environmentally minded country, and the Conservatives I actually think are quite good on green issues. The last Tory manifesto, which they were elected with an 80-seat majority, committed to net zero, and yet people people like Dawn would scream and shout about how it's not okay. Well, they were elected
it's not
on
okay.
net zero.
I would rather people
Why
be
don't you
able
honour the manifesto?
I would rather people to be able to feed their kids, to pay their bills, to keep warm, and that is what people are worried about in this country at the moment.
But they can't do that when Slough is underwater in 100 years' time, can they?
Actually,
Slough is going to be underwater in 100 years' time.
Well, we know that rising sea levels will affect a country like the United Kingdom.
Slough is about one of the most central places in the country, isn't it?
Also, you've got to pick your places.
People might be in trouble.
But as long as no one gets injured and no one's hurt, I can't lie and say it's going to be a great architectural loss if Croydon ended up a little bit submerged. But sorry, Croydon,
Rob
I love
Rinder.
you. Very, very quickly. Green taxes, just wokeism. What do you reckon?
Yeah, just wokeism. I think,
That's
obviously, we do need to do something. We are all doing our bit. However, coming out of the pandemic, we are all basically going to be skint. And the last thing we need is 25% of our electricity bill that we don't need to pay at the moment. It just needs to be put off another year or two.
You've got to be troubled by this as well. I mean, most of your advocacy is about the people that are least powerful, the marginalised. And if they can't afford to pay their energy bill, their housing and their security is at risk. It's a fundamental right. I mean, so it can't be something that you champion, right?
I mean, I think the government should do another £500 fee towards these people that are struggling to pay their gas bills. They've proposed that. I also think the 1.25% social care levy, it's obscene that that's going to be introduced in April just as these gas bills rocket for most of us, and so that should be delayed. But this green levy, most of that money is there to introduce things like insulation in people's homes. The most expensive heating is the heating that goes out through your roof.
Can I ask you something? Because this is how we started the show. I used to be a defence barrister, and then I ended up prosecuting cases here and abroad and in various places alongside the police. And so I went from being, if you like, a poacher to a gamekeeper, and it changed the complexion of the way I approached and feel about the police, not least that we only hear of the one thing that goes wrong rather than the thousands of good things that they do. But the reality is, really only 6% of crimes are being solved. Basically, if you call the police, they're not going to come. They're under-resourced. And sadly, they're not present in a lot of communities. The result is that there are some people taking the law into their own hands. Now, I'm not talking about online vigilantes who whatever they do is a bad thing, because with the best will in the world, they risk the safety of trials, right? So don't do that. But I'm talking about have-a-go heroes or people that don't feel safe in their home. What do you feel about people who take the law into their own hands, Dawn Neesom?
I look. It depends entirely on the circumstances,
of course it does.
Doesn't it? It really does. Vigilantism is a dangerous path to go down. However, the recent case where the chap drove his car into someone who was knifing a woman to death, killing the attacker. Now, I can't say hand on heart that I wouldn't have done the same in that situation, because I would.
Well, it'll be for a jury to decide.
Of course, absolutely.
Because ultimately, he is on trial. Ben,
has he been charged? Has he actually been charged? I know he's been arrested, but I wasn't sure if he'd been charged.
I'm not sure of that.
Rob.
I believe it has, but either way, bearing in mind the nature.
It's a live case now, totally,
we have to be
obviously.
quite careful about it.
I mean, in principle, taking the law into your own hands doesn't really work, because the law is there for a reason. It's meant to be black and white of what we follow.
Yeah, but take us back. I mean, you've been a gay rights activist. And we think to Stonewall, where they said enough was enough, and they committed on any view and affray, and they picked up those heels and they picked up their fists, and they fought their way for their rights, right?
Yeah, I mean, there is a great irony that, many things like gay rights, like the right to vote, were won by breaking laws. Brexit also apparently was won by an acceptable breaking of the law. But, I think that's maybe slightly different to some of the things where people try and, inverted commas, expose paedophiles online, and they do so in a way that can endanger people. You have to be careful with it. But the police should be reasonable in their mindset to recognising those distinctions, because I think some examples are pretty clear. But it is hard to get a prosecution, and you often hear about hate crimes taking up police resource. Well, I managed to get a conviction of a man that threatened to stab me for being gay. I don't know how he guessed, but he did, and I managed to get a conviction against that man. It was the most pathetic conviction. It was £600 fine.
Well, that's right. Not part of that, no doubt, is because of the privilege and the public platform that you have, which is not insignificant.
It's true.
I could talk about this forever. Benjamin Butterworth and Dawn Neesom. Watch them, listen to them. It's not just Punch and Judy. It demonstrates, you can have different points of view, disagree, and, well, how would we put it? Hate the sin but not the sinner.